wait for it to go live. Great. And then you screen share just like a normal thing. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So thanks everyone for coming out, and to all the people who have done the Digital Class Assist New England thing. This looks like a lot of really exciting people coming out, and it's going to be really interesting group of folks. So come to all of them. They'll be around here, here and there, and always on Google Hangouts, of course. So let's get the screen share set up, and then we'll go to the presentation. That's fine. Okay. So if you do have a computer in front of you, I'll be talking about Segetes. Here's all the links for these things. The actual application link that talks about a little bit about the framework and what it is, and has the whole application for Vergil as the first instance of a site using this framework, is up at segetes.io. And if you want to follow along on these things, or you follow some of the links, you can go to DCNE 2015, where all of this is. And to find out more about the Digital Class Assist seminars or Digital Class Assist New England and all the people broadcasting there with these links. So go check them out. There's a lot of really interesting stuff out there. Cool. So one of the first points that we really wanted to look at with Segetes was putting together a framework to render network texts is to craft the reading experience on a screen in as simple and beautiful as way as possible. And to spend a lot in the design of it, to look at what aspects of reading on a screen can be made into simplified, what aspects can be made more interactive, what it means to use all of those resources that a web browser provides to aid and facilitate in the process of reading. And similarly with this, especially for text, for classical text, we wanted to make interacting with metadata as intuitive as interacting with the text itself, right? No matter what device you use, which is the very critical point here, you can access a site built with the Segetes framework via a normal laptop web browser, a tablet, a phone, any of that, and interact with the metadata, and hopefully as streamlined as process. And finally, the last big tenet of what we wanted to do here was make sharing data with others, that for the metadata that you generate and for all of the text and information that you put together, sharing that data should be as easy as possible. Sharing that data should be as easy as possible with fellow researchers. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but quick question: when you're saying metadata, what are you describing?
So metadata and related data. That's a good question. I feel like the things that constitute metadata should be anything that's not the actual source text. People might disagree with me about that. Some people have said that I juxtapose the terms between data and metadata too much, and it's all data, and there's no difference between the actual metadata and data. I think that at some points it just is an easy way to refer to the things that aren't the text itself versus all of the different integral features, the linked data, the entities, the media, all of that sort of stuff that's related to a given text and makes it more of a networked text. I would refer to that more as metadata, though technically you could say it's all data, and there's not a strong juxtaposition between data and metadata. It can go both ways. Okay. Yeah.
So something as simple as the definition of a word, if there were a link that provided that, could be metadata, or a link to a commentary by a particular author could also be metadata.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, that's more of my colloquialism rather than a good textbook definition. But for the purposes of just needing to talk about this in a reasonable fashion, that's what I use it as. So yeah, being able to have a good design, make a good reading experience, interact with the data in a meaningful way, and share it with others really was something that we wanted to get off the ground here and make a really useful framework that other people, anyone in this room, could build their own network text, could render their own application with it. So specifically, this looks like, those are a lot of good ideas. Specifically, this looks like removing obstacles to users, right? And swapping instantly between our simple text view, right? That's only the text itself, and then in at least 1 or 2 clicks, I'll see pertinent related data and metadata, and remove with as much codification removed as possible. So, for instance, I worked as a Latin tutor for a long time, and the ABL and ACC and GEN of these students, they would oftentimes have a hard time understanding codification. So now that we have almost infinite space to create on and add information on, removing as much codification as possible, where with the asterisks where possible, not everywhere, was one of the central tenets here into making the best interactive experience with reading. Must work across all devices, especially on smaller screens. That real estate is really gets taken up very quickly, especially when we'll see with translations. It goes very quickly. And especially we wanted to use emerging technologies to build application with much less code and development time and maintenance, because the people that would use a framework like this would probably not have a whole technical team to themselves, not maybe even be a dedicated programmer. We'll look at how emerging technologies can make it streamline development and make it easy and more fun to work with. Oftentimes programming turns into a chore and a nightmare for some people, even the best of us. But it doesn't need to be that way. If we can streamline this development process, we can make things as fun as possible. So the goal then from this was to make it so that any developer with at least a little basic programming knowledge should be able to set up the application and start playing around with it. Not guaranteeing that you'd be able to necessarily, map 50 different translations across each other and to your given source text, some of the big complex things. But being able to have something simple and streamlined enough that any developer with basic programming knowledge should be able to make an application, render a network text with this, and have fun doing it. It wanted to be a solution that everyone can use, especially given that they have an interest in digital projects and don't completely hate them. So that's what we wanted there. Generalizable, simple and straightforward as possible. So then a little bit more about what it turned into, going from these beliefs that we started with. And I developed as I talked to people who steered me in good directions. So what it turned into, Segetes really is a framework for creating and curating network texts. And that's a keyword that we'll revisit again. Using different modules for importing the data and identifying and aggregating related data or metadata, as you refer to it, and exporting that data to commonly used models and formats. Being able to have that whole process streamlined together in one place was important here. And then the first site that's built with it is the Vergil site at segetes.io, rendered as a network text that you can see and play with now if you so desire. So that's the short version of what it is. The name especially has a little bit of a story with it. So visiting, why did you call it Segetes? It's kind of weird, right? Segetes comes from that first line of the Georgics, Kutvakia Laita Segetes, and this harkens back to my days as a Nebraskan growing up, and all the long walks I went through the fields, and thought and contemplated about my life and things like that. and discovered Vergil and learned about his work and was fascinated by all of these concepts and metaphoric knowledge, insights that he had that was still very relevant to my context 2,000 years later. So if we fast forward to when I was working as a senior web developer in DC and doubling at an archaeological dig in Sicily during the summers, spending long hours in the sun looking out over these fields in Sicily and thinking about complex data models and how they build web applications, I started thinking about if you consider data being something bigger than just like ones and zeros, but rather interconnections of a lot of different things, Internet of Things, that whole idea. One of the most ecumenical data models out there is the simple field, right, with the striated, repeated row with its single constituent. And I was thinking about poetry and the way that data model almost in some ways was very similar, and how those two could feed through each other and make something that not only that would be interesting and high performing, but something that would last and something that people would keep using and provide methodologies that might last thousands and thousands of years. So that's a little bit where the name came from. Really important, like I mentioned, what happened when we talk about a network text, and why might my network text be important instead of maybe a digital edition, right? The key concepts I feel like of a network text, this is very specific. It is text, so this framework lets you build network texts. It's not necessarily, it wouldn't be the best framework for audio or media, though it might interact with those things. It is text-based. It involves, a network text involves more of an intersection of resources rather than generating a lot of new content itself, like a blog or a digital publication or something like that. It's really focused on being shareable, definitely, because it mostly pulls resources from other avenues. And the creation of it is very collaborative, right? So the actual creation of building a network text is more talking to a lot of different people and having a lot of different researchers and programmers and supervisors, everyone giving a lot of inputs and creating the best product possible. Especially being focused on aggregating materials and putting them all in one place, exporting them into one big comprehensive document that has as much of the related data as possible. So it harkens into our linked open data, just linked data in general, that whole philosophy. So if you can imagine, if you wanted to make something like this, for an author that you care about, you could have your one small node being the small blue dot in the entire universe of linked data, or some such. It participates in that bigger philosophy of sharing and exporting and being able to link and reference things in a wider context. So this was very careful. Why is it not a framework for creating digital editions? A digital edition, I feel like, from what I've read and studied about it, it's involves more of a conventional editing process. And a digital edition is something just a little bit more specific and has a little bit more to it. Whereas a network text, the whole category might be very broad. A digital edition is definitely something very focused. A lot of people have said a lot of good things about this idea, and some of them are in this room, so I'll tread lightly. But the whole idea is that a network text wouldn't hope to replace anything, but enhance everything, right?
I'd like to modify that. I'd like to replace the digital edition with the network text. And I think we need something. I think you're touching on an interesting difference in point of view from very traditional frameworks, from those, I think, that reflect a digital edition, just one kind of network text, based upon the literal sense of codification, if I understand it correctly, making it into a codex. And it makes fine, but there's like the digital library is really focused on the degree to which you can replicate in a digital form exactly the sort of the functionality and the consensus behind that functionality of a print edition, except now you need a tenure for it. Now it counts in the US, which it hasn't. So I think I really like this idea of the network text, because we need this thing, which, we have a model for what, I can tell you what I think the important components are right now, but what are the elements that they're all open. They branch out, and even if you say, well, named entities, okay, named entities, what's that mean? You get into social network analysis and geospatial analysis, and then it starts exploding outwards, linguistic annotation, well, what does that mean? All these things are increasingly, as an entry point to increasingly productive network. So this is a great, I love this stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. That's yeah, better than I could say it. Yeah, they share, definitely share domains, network text, and digital editions. Maybe you can have one without the other in both ways, but just in the way that a 1951 edition should replace the 1902 edition of a certain author, right? A network text you could easily have two network texts of the same authors that have different metadata and could share and combine resources between each other, doing georeferencing, linking to different systems of linked data, all of that sort of thing. So that's the long and short of network text. There's a lot on Wikipedia about network text that's interesting because Wikipedia classifies itself as a network text, which I think is an interesting comparison. And some people are trying to publish network text as their own books, which is all interesting. But I think that there's a lot of good stuff going on there. So just big picture then, if we're going to look at it, what is Segetes? What is the framework, and what's all the code that does this? Right now, it's in two different pieces. So it's a framework that constitutes all of the web application, and then modules for creating and managing the data. The framework is all JavaScript. It's a full JavaScript stack. So if you're working with this, the only functional programming language you'll have to know is JavaScript. And then you will also have your front end HTML and CSS to style things and stuff like that. But the actual programming language is all done in JavaScript. So it's only one language. So this, I wanted to be a better entry point for anyone that has, done the code school class on JavaScript, maybe taken a class on JavaScript in an actual university. But this is the stack that it pulls together. So these components, Node.js, MongoDB, Express.js, and AngularJS, is the full stack for running a server and having a database. And it's super streamlined and easy to use, in my opinion. Node.js, a JavaScript platform runtime environment. You guys can look through these more. They have links and things. MongoDB is the database. Express is the server for HTTP. Angular is the client-side application, which we'll look at a little bit more, because that's something that I feel like is really a key part of this, making, as some like to say it, branching away from the traditional way that mainframes worked in the 70s, that a lot of the internet works like right now, where the application server rendered a screen and it sent over the network to a dumb terminal. This is from the Meteor documentation, which uses the same technologies as this. And they claim, but the best teams with the biggest budgets and the longest schedules now build applications in JavaScript, the language that this is using, that run on the client or on the user's computer. These apps have stellar interfaces. They don't reload pages. They're reactive. Changes from any client immediately appear on everyone's screen. So that client-side application is really robust in the Segetes framework, and it offloads a lot of the server resources, the weight on the server resources to actually run it. So it hopefully should be lightweight for running in a lot of different environments whenever it needs to. So that's the overview of what the framework, the actual web application that you see is. The whole process of getting and managing the data, all of those modules, are right now all in Python. unfortunately. Python is a very good language, and it's not unfortunate that it's in Python. It's only unfortunate that they're in two different languages. We'd love to have all that done in one language, in JavaScript. So hopefully we can implement that someday as more tools get ported over to JavaScript and more support is there. But right now they're all in Python, and all of the good libraries that people use are all in Python that it uses for its resources. So if you want to help implement those in JavaScript, I would love to talk to you. Yeah, so the modules, just the main thing to know about them for right now, the big picture of them, they're designed to help you import, manage, and export your data. That's all what they do. The design was one of the actual user experience of reading was one of the main tenets of wanting to create a framework like this, right? And it focuses on the big question that I mentioned earlier: what do we want our reading experience to be on a screen to be like now that we're chained to these machines virtually, 12, 14, 16 hours a day? I don't know how much you guys are on them, but I'm on my computer a lot, and I do a lot more and more of my reading on a screen. And if the thousands of pages that our graduate students print out every semester are any kind of an indicator, we really need to figure out a way to improve our reading experience on a screen to make it be as good as, or hopefully someday even better than reading on a piece of paper, which I still prefer, unfortunately. But we have all of we have all these great resources, we have all these great tools, we can make network texts. Why is our reading experience on a screen not better? Why don't we want to take notes on a PDF on a screen instead of printing them out surreptitiously on our department's printer or wherever else we find them? Wherever else we may. I'm sure no one does that. So to start thinking about this and the way to ask a better question of how we want to read on a screen, I looked at, looks like I'm gonna, my laptop's gonna die. I looked at reforms in digital journalism, especially, so this is my background. I worked for WMU's, the DC NPR station when I was living in DC. So looking at the people, especially in digital journalism now, as more people like New York Times and Washington Post have lowering userships on print media, and they're starting to find out that the only way they're going to make money anymore is if people pay to read their websites. Not even to interact with it, see all of the different media, but they actually pay to read their website. How can they, they're the ones who have probably had to think most about making the reading experience good and how they can construct a narrative in a digital fashion, which I think there's some really cool innovations happening there right now. So this goes to us, in digital humanities. How can we improve the readability of the text that we publish? If we're going to publish, an open source version of Vergil, how do we improve the readability of those texts, of that text? How do we make it a pleasurable experience for a user to come to our site and read there? Also involved in this, very big in editorial design for web right now, is this grid-based design. These are my two favorite people who have talked a lot about it. And it goes back to 18th century Dutch printmaking, and even longer back, I feel like, to just scrolling media in general. That a lot of people have written interesting things about. Especially one of the pivotal tenets of this, I feel like, is, and just in general, is all of the different scientific backings to the way that we interact with text on a screen. So like Android's recent material design principles that came out in 2015 talking about characters and line length give us a graph like this. There is an optimal length, or width, I guess, to read text. According to Google's principles of material design, that took it from a bunch of other people elsewhere that studied this, have been studying this since the 70s. Between 40 and 60 characters, when we have new lines, is the optimal reading experience, according to these people. Other people say 55 to 70 characters per line. Anything really, the point to know, anything over 90 characters is considered to be bad. It doesn't grab our attention anymore. because the reason why they say this is our mind is activated, just like in poetry. Our mind is activated at the start of the line, and we find something new and interesting to think about, to see, and then that attention gradually drops off in a micro sense, gradually drops off to the end of the line, and then starts again at the new line. So here we have too narrow. The process of reading not being able to be long enough for that line, that rate of text and information coming at us, whereas down there we have things going too wide. This really started for web things. This really started in my mind with Snowfall. Snowfall is a really cool interactive narrative that came out in 2012 by the New York Times. Everyone should go check it out if they haven't. It's done a lot of interesting stuff. So this was the first one that made this thinner actual text column and left all this white space out here, which is bare, right? So this is about 60-40 on a normal browser, 60% text to 40% white space, and it has about 100 characters per line. You can go through and find all the average, but it's somewhere around 100 characters per line. Still not within the optimal range for Google, right? If you look at all of the redesigns that have happened in 2014 with New York Times and Washington Post and NPR, we start seeing the same trends repeated over and over again. So New York Times is more like 70 characters per line, as we can see here, right? Washington Post, same exact thing. It's very, very similar. And NPR is very similar to this too, right? Are around 70 characters per line. Medium.com, which was a big influence to me, Medium.com is around 60 per line. So hitting that ideal range a little bit more clearly, if you want to see it that way. But yeah, that's how reading experience, I feel like, has been shaped, especially in the last 16 to 18 months. So some people might say, this, good design, these things are just flashy and trendy in the next, next 6 to 12 months, it'll be something else, and I'd want something that lasts and is robust, like Wikipedia, which has around 200 characters per line. You could see it that way. There's nothing to prove you wrong about that. You could also see it as the newest iteration of a union of form and content that's based on centuries of printmaking and millennia of scrolling media. So I'll leave it up to you to have sort that out for yourself. Definitely, if you use this framework, you can add your own themes and change the design as you see fit. But for the people that say it's just too flashy and trendy and doesn't have anything significant to it, I think we need to maybe say academic. Just because it's for an academic purpose doesn't mean it can't have good design. It should have good design no matter what purpose it's used for. So that's all I'll say there. It wanted to make a simple, really distraction-free environment, right? That displays just the text, nothing else popping up on the page, no, related stories, little like this, share this, nothing else, just this simple text, but be able to share the information, the metadata and related data about a given line very, very quickly and easily, right? So just the text, nothing else is here. But when we hover over various lines, we get our little plus shape over here. And when we click on that, we can see all of the related data next to it. So in our Vergil model, this has things like scansion, and it will toggle scansion from the modules that predictively looked at scansion here. It has definition.
Could you just talk about, maybe you could add it, maybe come back to it, but where does the scansion come from? What does it look like in the back end? How do you weave it in?
So
here?
Yeah, scansion was a thing from the modules that takes a syllabifier that was based off of a work from a actually a priest in Southern California, wrote this Elaboratier in JavaScript, and I took his work and I implemented it in Python, and contributed it to a toolkit that, so it split up all the different syllables, and then predictably looked at the line and said, let's just find all of the ones that are long by nature, and then find all the ones that are long by position, and try to fit our pattern of dactylic hexameter that it had all the different possibilities for, dactyls and spondees in that pattern. And so it's not always perfect, but it does predict, it predicted all of them, and then it just needs a little bit of scrubbing at the end to be able to make sure this did it in the correct way.
So you actually have a static, you went through and you produced your own. I'm asking because not for the first time, but I'm not the first person, but as an exercise, I just produced scans for all of Homer, all Homeric. And there you have the issue of display. There's all these goddamn accents floating around. I don't know what. Yeah. It's not as easy as just sticking them longs and shorts there. But it's now important for me to understand how different people do a good job of this.
Sure.
So you dealt with, but you went through and you corrected, you looked at the places that we had multiple possibilities and resolved them by hand and have it. There you go.
So this is what it looks like, and then it just has a before and after for in the CSS. So that has the little before being the mark above the ab there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it predictably said this is the scansion for this line, and then there's a few places where you need to go back and fix it. But this actual rendering of those little guys above the text is all just in CSS.
It would be one of the problems with starting with Latin is that in a number of dimensions you end up starting with the easy case. It's hard often to scale to the hard case from the easy case because you start with Greek. Latin consists of getting rid of a lot of complexity and simplification almost always. Mm. So I'm looking at this, hoping we can get all of our. I would love to see every single text we ever collect in this environment, among others. But this is like a really nice one. Our idea would be we would have this cornucopia full of stuff, and then someone like you could take it and provide. Say we're doing it like 70 characters width, and here's our meter, and here's how we do it, and that your creativity would then come into play with as much material as we can give you, or as you could collect from other people. We will help as much as we can.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of this essentially represents. That same thing. There were a few places where it brought different media sources together, like the scansion it generated itself, all of the entities in media it did itself, and were done manually. Otherwise, in the case of the media.
How did you do the entities? Do you have your own entity classification system?
Yeah, just really a very simple one for now, and it resolves to itself. So hopefully it can use those reference like a DBpedia or one of the other better classification
systems. Does it do
systems.
Classification or also identification? Does it say Washington here looks like a place, or does it also say Washington, probably is Washington D.C. or Washington State?
It doesn't do any disambiguation because it's its purposes were very small, just
that's still awesome.
Yeah, but so here we have Troy, and then it has Troy, and you can follow Troy, the link to Troy, and see here's Troy, here's some pertinent information about Troy, right? And there's all the lines in the text for this framework, our source text, where Troy pops up at, and you can follow these to say, oh, this is an interesting use of Troy in this line. Let's go learn about that and find out something interesting here. So that's the main idea with it. But yeah, it's essentially the same thing. The creative process for whoever would make a Segetes framework would be to find a great repository that has a bunch of XML or flat text or whatever else, and import it into utilizing all the metadata, and add some to itself, bring in all of the creative components that they can find, and toggle very nicely between, right, just the spare text, only that, and then having a lot of information about it. Criticism, so the commentary is for the first 6 books of Vergil. The Connington is all from the Creative Commons license work on Perseus that they made available, which was awesome because the other commentary versions, the Greenough and Kittredge, that we got from Google Books was the OCR was terrible. And so a small group of concerned librarians from my hometown is helping with editing that.
What is OCR?
The optical character recognition for when you have a PDF. So I downloaded this huge PDF from Google Books that was like 30 megabytes or something. I used a library called Tesseract that would convert them into JPEGs from the PDF, and then take those JPEGs and extract the text that, as well as it could identify from these things. So, like for instance, it didn't do any Greek, right?
Tesseract can now.
Tesseract can now.
Go to Ancient Greek OCR.org or whatever, and you get Nick White's work where he's optimized Tesseract so he gets really pretty good results for OCR or Greek. So there's Octopus does Greek also, but Tesseract is very clever. So there's no reason you can't start getting a very solid starting point.
Better, yeah, that would be wonderful. So as we, look further than this, we could add that library into the modules that let you take a PDF and have automatically convert with Tesseract and all those different things for you. Criticism was an interesting thing, inspired from a lot of conversations that I had with other graduate students and researchers about this text. This is data from JSTOR's API that all of these articles contain the full text of whatever the subject line is. So these things, if you click, you can follow the link to go see the article on JSTOR. If you have and then you can log in there or use whatever university login you need to access those resources. But this can get better as it, as our modules for, lemmatizing and doing all of those different various good things get better, and JSTOR's data API lets us talk about, is nice to us in using this. But that's what's going on there. Related passages also are something that I was really interested in. So the modules create a text similarity index between for all of classical literature that I had available to me through the Creative Commons licensed content at the Perseus project, right? And the text similarity index is based off of several different things. We had, I wrote about 4 different algorithms to compare the texts in the best way possible. And the one that won out over all of the other ones was the simplest one. So that was kind of nice in a way. And it was because it was the one that was also the fastest, using something called Elevenstein distance measurement between these 2 sequences. And then taking into account the number of tokens and the average token length for the line, and then making a similarity index based off of that. So here we have 2 for like Vergil. We'll look at this more later, and I can talk more about it then as we have time. So there's a bunch of other features. If you log in, you can take notes on a given text. So I'll log in with my Google account here really quickly. Right now, all the notes are private, but you could conceivably find a way to publish notes and share notes in the future. Share your notes with a class that you're running. Share your notes with, your friends on Facebook. However you want to do sharing there. Another big feature. So let's log in. Here, this little blue marker right now says I have a note on this passage. Oh, so you have, ovided metamorphosis. Cool. I can update it really quickly. Update for DCNE, right? And save it. Let's close our browser and then go back and look. There's all of my notes that I've taken on all of Vergil. So that's really, really lightweight. Can be built out as you guys would have, as anyone who's building a site like this could conceive of doing interesting things with notes and sharing and collaborating there. Yeah. So all that said, it goes from the very simple to the very complex very quickly, and that's one of the primary design challenges here. Looking at if you actually wanted to build something like this with yourself, the big questions of making a network text or doing this sort of project, no matter what framework or system you're using, the main questions of how can we ingest the data, how can we aggregate, extract, identify related data, metadata, and how can we render all of this in a browser?
Before you cut that screen, I really wish you would put one more line in there, which is how do we export data?
Yeah.
In a way that because the problem is there's a lot of systems where you can if they have the Roach motels design where the data checks in but doesn't check out, and that means if you lose aren't able to get the initial structure, then you get stuck. So that's sometimes harder to do, and even if that's a desideratum or an objection of old cranks like me, it's nice to put it in there as on that level right now on this page.
Yeah, definitely. How can we export the data is really, really important. How can we share it with other people in a meaningful way? So we can talk really quick about this. The modules are the first touch point for this, as we're running out of time a little bit more. If I go over time, please someone throw something at me so I don't just keep talking. The modules are the main touch point for this. So the ingest module right now, as it's growing and becoming more robust for different data sources, can take either flat text or XML, that's TEI, as the only version of XML that it uses right now, and to predictably analyze that text and predict what parts of the schema different facets of that text should go to. So if you copy and paste Gutenberg into a flat text file and give it to Segetes ingest modules, run the command line utility for it right now, or hopefully someday upload it via a GUI, it'll predict that this is either prose or poetry, this is paragraph breaks, section breaks, all of those sorts of things. Not that it'll be right. It'll just say this probably is this way. This is what it looks like. The commentary, what we see, tags along with this. So if you have really awesome TEI XML for a commentary, it ingests that and associates those comments to whatever data model you set up with your ingest, and other customizations. Definitions. The important part about definitions that I wanted to touch on is we saw the definitions ingest uses a library out there right now or a dictionary out there right now, which is on GitHub called OpenWords. And OpenWords is a updated version of William Whitaker's words that was programmed originally in Ada. Based on his career as a programmer in DARPA, I found this fascinating. The whole history of Whitaker's words is really interesting, how he came to do all this stuff. He has a lot of really great resources, but as you probably saw, it's a work in progress. There's a lot left to be done on it. If we look at this, so for words that it doesn't have or might not get right, or if you just want to learn more about a specific word, it has the links to Perseus, and then you can find their much better dictionary resources linked right there. So that's all the definitions. The entities is very simple, very streamlined right now, but should be made more sophisticated as time goes on. The scansion already talked about a little bit, the way that the modules do that. Text reuse has those different algorithms to compare against the whole corpus of Latin and Greek, what the author might have derived from, or what later authors might have derived from him or her. And in looking at this, we found I drew my curve at anything with a similarity index of 60 or higher, and found that across all of Vergil, it's pretty standard. He's very intertextual, right? But everything below 60, it started to be too much and too dissimilar to really incorporate them in the network text as I wanted to do it. So if you look at just the authors and the given passages that have this similarity index with them, we start seeing, it's very small here, but Cicero and Livy and the larger prose writers having the most comparisons with our source text, just Vergil is what I did here, not with each other, just all of them against Vergil, right?
When you say comparisons, significant comparisons.
Yeah, above 60.
Above 60.
Yep, is what I ended up looking at. And so this monitor is a little bit small, but this is all the ones for the Aeneid and for the Georgics and for the Eclogues. But I started thinking this isn't really fair because there's, Cicero and Livy have much, more work, right? So if we normalize this to just the actual author's work slang, we start seeing more interesting people that maybe we would predict, like Lucretius and Ovid. Segetes is another interesting find here. Maybe there's more work to be done there. I don't know if I've ever read an article about intertextuality with him and Vergil. But you can focus on specific, so this is just the Aeneid. If you go look at these drafts in a browser, you can see them better. This is just the Aeneid. Segetes winning right here. Columella for the Georgics is very high, much higher once things are normalized than everyone else, which makes sense.
When you do a comparison with lines of the Aeneid to prose that doesn't have lines, are you in sliding windows? What are your units?
The units for
the prose that you're comparing to the poetry.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing with the prose was putting the entire document into one long string.
Yeah.
And then chunking that at different intervals, and then iterating forward, cursing forward at much smaller intervals. So you would move. So it would be a little bit like, is that weird? So if here's the whole line of prose, right? This would be one chunk. And this would be another chunk, and this would be another chunk, and so on. Right?
So it's a fixed window of some kind you're sliding across. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then if several of those windows match each other, several of those chunks match each other in the same spot, it just relates the whole passage back to.
You slide it together.
Yeah.
Have you looked at the Proteus work that David Smith has done Northeastern?
Good.
You haven't. You'll enjoy seeing. Talk about that.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so it's fun stuff. Text reuse is a really interesting area of just natural language processing, any of those questions in general. And it can have some, it's not necessarily to say that we should go out and find each one of these references and write an article about them. It's nothing like that. It's just maybe we should know about when Columella uses these passages of Vergil. If we're going to write about, an in-depth slow reading analysis of that given passage of Vergil, we can know that these people have similar things to him.
It's 1 o'clock. We may need to get out of this classroom. Maybe we can
go to the other one.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Continue and have
So,
discussion.
1 second.
What time is class? Okay, we got
Yeah, I just have like 5 minutes left in this.
nobody's chasing us out yet, so we just start moving. You usually see the angry, glowering people.
Yeah.
Is the Hangout paused or
I think it's
Is it just
still, just going.
we can edit it later?
Okay.
And Luther, I hope you will talk a little bit about your own poetry and how, because when I look at your poetry, I think about how do we connect your poetry back to the Greek text. So we'll start with the poetry as sort of an autonomous thing, and then maybe start to interrogate it and see the alignments. This is sort of parallel text analysis. Even though you're a poet and you're doing something which is different from literal translation, nevertheless, that dialectic, the dialectic between your conception and the original Greek, or Latin. It's a little interesting thing.
Yeah, that whole process of just mapping translations to the original in general, I think is interesting.
I want to keep you from having.
Oh, yeah. I think it's
Well, so my wife was so pleased with me eating all this fruit and these vegetables. It was like bacon. Maybe it wouldn't be as much bacon on this campus, but there might be others.
That's what there's a